Your Honor, I do not comprehend. What transgression have I committed? Lorenzo Adams stood in restraints. 17 years of age, an honors student. His tone was composed, respectful, as his parents had instilled. Judge Harold Whitfield did not even lift his gaze from his documents. Silence your tongue, young man. Your kind are all the same. Savages, every one of you. A court official permitted himself a slight smile. Someone in the rear gallery raised a mobile device, commencing a recording, not for assistance, but to observe. No one rose to his defense. No one uttered a protest. A sentence of life without the possibility of parole, declared Whitfield. Remove this individual from my jurisdiction. Lorenzo's mother emitted a piercing cry. The court officer apprehended her arm. The judge remained unmoved. But what no one present knew, not the magistrate, not the constables, not a single soul in attendance who found amusement in the spectacle, was that in mere moments, every one of them would yearn to retract their actions. You see, that particular juncture did not conclude as they had anticipated. Very well. Let us delve into the narrative of today. 3 weeks prior, on a balmy Friday eve in early October, within Richmond, Virginia, Lorenzo Adams was seated at his kitchen table, his laptop illuminated, and a partially consumed bowl of cereal nearby. He was 17, slender, with contemplative eyes, the sort of young man who offered a compliant, "Yes, ma'am," without prompting. He was meticulously preparing a legal argument for an upcoming debate. The subject at hand was the reformation of the criminal justice system. He articulated the words silently, his pencil tapping a rhythmic cadence against the tabletop. His mother, Denise, moved about the kitchen behind him, clad in hospital attire with her hair drawn back tightly. A pediatric surgeon, accustomed to 12-hour overnight shifts 3 days a week, she packed a turkey sandwich into a paper sack and bestowed a kiss upon Lorenzo's head as she passed. "Your father sends his regards," she conveyed. "He will call following his engagements." Lorenzo offered a subtle roll of his eyes, not in anger, but with that specific blend of affection that only an adolescent can mask as mild irritation. "He invariably says that." "And he invariably makes the call, does he not?" She was correct. He always did. His father, Raymond Adams, was away on business. That was the extent of Lorenzo's discourse regarding his father's activities: paternal travels, paternal meetings, paternal importance, though never elaboration. A framed photograph adorned the hallway wall, depicting Raymond in a somber suit, engaging in a handshake with dignitaries at some formal occasion. Lorenzo passed it daily without pause. It was simply his father in his element. Their residence was modest, its floors pristine, its ambiance warm. A sofa adorned with a casually draped blanket, 3 photographs positioned above the television. Lorenzo in his middle school graduation cap and gown, the family at the Grand Canyon, and an unposed shot of him embracing his mother with mirth. This was a home permeated by affection, a palpable warmth felt from the moment one crossed the threshold. That evening, Lorenzo assisted his elderly neighbor in transporting her grocery bags from her vehicle to her front stoop. She presented him with a butterscotch confection. He expressed his gratitude and placed it in his pocket. He sent a text message to his closest companion, Terrence Cole. "Movie marathon this evening? I'll bring the snacks." Before retiring, he perused 2 pages of a civil rights memoir, underlining a passage concerning inherent dignity. Subsequently, he closed the volume and drifted into slumber. Such was the character of Lorenzo Adams. Such was the young man the system was poised to dismantle. Now, allow me to illuminate the world in which he resided. Richmond harbored a history, the sort that is conspicuously absent from any tourism brochure. Decades of racial discord within the police department cast a long shadow. 3 months prior, an incident involving excessive force had ignited demonstrations in the city center. A black man was subdued on the asphalt. Mobile device footage, widespread indignation, illuminated candles, and hastily scrawled placards. The police chief pledged a more stringent enforcement strategy. Everyone understood the implications: increased police presence in specific districts, more frequent stops, more hands pressed flat against the cold metal of vehicle hoods for individuals whose appearance fit a particular profile. Lorenzo's neighborhood occupied a precarious position on this invisible dividing line. One side boasted meticulously maintained lawns, video surveillance at entryways, and private security emblems staked into vibrant flower beds. The other displayed community watch notices affixed to utility poles and patrol cars cruising at a pace slow enough to discern every fissure in the pavement. As night descended, crickets chirped their nocturnal chorus. Porch lights cast an amber glow. A distant siren wailed once across the city, then fell silent. A helicopter's searchlight swept over a neighborhood 2 blocks distant. This was routine, yet it never offered a sense of ease. It was the sort of phenomenon one learned to sleep through, but never ceased to perceive. On Friday night, Lorenzo and Terrence embarked on a walk to a corner store 6 blocks away, ostensibly for movie refreshments. Potato chips, carbonated beverages, perhaps a bag of gummy worms, if the premium variety was available. They proceeded side by side, attired in hoodies and athletic footwear. Lorenzo carried his debate notebook within his backpack. Their conversation was animated, revolving around a jest Terrence had made in class that morning. The street was tranquil. Street lights cast luminous pools of orange across the asphalt. A dog barked from behind a chain-link fence, then ceased its vocalization. The air was scented with freshly mown grass and cooling charcoal. It was ordinary, mundane, secure. And then, headlights appeared. A patrol vehicle cruised by at a leisurely pace. Lorenzo cast a brief glance in its direction. Terrence continued his discourse. The vehicle proceeded. Then, it halted. Subsequently, it reversed. Red and blue emergency lights abruptly illuminated. The powerful spotlight struck both youths directly in the face. Lorenzo raised his hand to shield his eyes. The police radio crackled, a sharp, piercing sound reminiscent of something fracturing. 2 adolescent males were proceeding homeward, their hands empty, their backpacks laden. And behind them, a police cruiser blazed against the darkness, as if signaling the commencement of an irreversible decline. For indeed, that is precisely what it was. The driver's side portal swung open. A heavy boot made contact with the pavement. Then another. Officer Dale Granger emerged as if he were the sole proprietor of the thoroughfare. Caucasian, in his mid-30s, with a closely cropped haircut so tight it revealed the sheen of his scalp under the artificial illumination. One hand rested near his belt, fingers hovering mere inches from his sidearm. His body-worn camera, a red blinking indicator on his chest, was actively recording everything, though he appeared indifferent to its function. He advanced towards the youths with the predatory certainty of a canine cornering a rabbit. Deliberate, assured, a verdict already rendered. "Where are you 2 headed?" Lorenzo lowered his hand from his eyes. The blinding spotlight persisted. He could discern little of the officer's visage, only a dark outline against the light and a resonant voice. "We are simply walking to my friend's residence, sir," Lorenzo replied. Calmly, steadily, every word chosen with the meticulousness his parents had instilled for moments precisely such as this. "We reside a few blocks from here." Granger offered no acknowledgement of Lorenzo's statements. His gaze flickered between Lorenzo and Terrence. His jaw tensed, as though he were masticating something acrid. "You fit a description." 5 words. No elaboration, no specifics, no justifiable grounds. Merely 5 words and a badge. And, abruptly, 2 teenagers purchasing confectionery items were transformed into suspects. "A description of what, sir?" Lorenzo inquired, maintaining his polite, measured tone. "Did I grant you permission to pose inquiries?" Granger moved closer, his proximity such that Lorenzo detected the aroma of coffee on his breath and the distinct scent of worn leather from his holster. "Identification, both of you, immediately." Lorenzo reached deliberately into his rear pocket and produced his school identification card. Jefferson High School, junior year. The photograph depicted a young man with a shy, half-smile. Granger snatched it, glanced at it for less than a second, and thrust it back towards Lorenzo's chest. "And you?" He turned his attention to Terence. Terence's hands were visibly trembling. I do not have one with me, sir." Granger scrutinized him, then gestured towards the curb. "Take a seat. Do not move. Do not speak." Terence complied, his sneakers scraping against the concrete. Granger unfastened Lorenzo's backpack without seeking consent. No warrant, no permission, no justifiable grounds. Merely an individual in uniform rummaging through a teenager's possessions as though it were his inherent prerogative. He first extracted the debate notebook, flipping through its pages of handwritten arguments, research notes, and highlighted excerpts from landmark Supreme Court decisions. Granger regarded it as inconsequential material. He then tossed it onto the ground. The pages fanned open upon the damp concrete, representing 3 weeks of diligent work discarded like refuse. Lorenzo winced, yet maintained his hands on the hood and his gaze directed forward. Granger continued his search. A pack of chewing gum, a phone charger, a case for writing implements. Each item was tossed aside sequentially, as if to provoke a reaction from Lorenzo. Then he discovered it. A compact red Swiss Army knife, 2 inches when folded, a birthday gift from Lorenzo's grandfather, his name elegantly engraved on the handle. Lorenzo employed it for sharpening pencils and opening packages. It was a completely lawful implement for a 17-year-old to possess in Virginia. Granger held it aloft in the spotlight as if he had unearthed an instrument of homicide. "Well, well, well." His voice resonated with palpable satisfaction. "What have we here?" "A weapon." "Sir, that is merely a cease your discourse." Granger seized Lorenzo's arm, yanking it forcefully behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed as they secured his right wrist, then his left. The cold metal dug into his skin, deliberately tightened. "Officer, it is a Swiss Army knife. It is legal. I implore you. I commanded you to be silent. You are under arrest." Terence sprang to his feet. "He has done nothing. We were merely walking. You cannot—" Granger spun around, closing the distance in 2 swift strides. He grasped Terence by his collar and violently slammed him against the patrol car. The young man's head struck the metal with a dull impact. A thin crimson line appeared at his temple. "Do you wish to join him? Sit down and remain quiet, or you will be next." Terence retreated to the curb, pressing his trembling hands between his knees. Crippled by fear, he dared not wipe the blood streaking down his face. A second patrol vehicle arrived. 2 additional officers disembarked. Both were Caucasian, both composed, both regarding the 2 black teenagers as though this were just another ordinary Friday. For them, it was. 3 officers, 2 adolescent males, 0 transgressions. And no one intervened. No one lowered a window. The neighborhood observed from behind drawn curtains, united by a silent understanding that this was the established order of affairs. 20 minutes earlier, a convenience store located 2 blocks to the south had been subjected to a robbery. The description of the perpetrator: a black male wearing a dark hoodie. No height, no weight, no age specified. a description that encompassed half the teenage boys in Richmond on any given Friday evening. The actual perpetrator was a portly man in his 30s, bearing a neck tattoo and a scar across his left cheek. He bore no resemblance to Lorenzo. He was already 6 miles away, meticulously counting cash in a parking lot. Granger evinced no concern for accuracy. His focus was on statistics. He activated his radio and uttered the words that would irrevocably alter Lorenzo's entire existence. 2 suspects detained, matching the robbery description. 1 armed with a bladed instrument, requesting transport. Armed with a bladed instrument, a Swiss Army knife bearing his grandfather's inscription. Lorenzo stood manacled under the pulsating emergency lights, uttering not a sound. Not because he had nothing to articulate, but because he understood at 17, he already knew that his pronouncements held no weight here. His school identification was inconsequential. His debate accolades and honor roll certificates were meaningless. Here, he was merely a black youth in a hooded sweatshirt, and that, regrettably, was sufficient. Terence was released. No incriminating evidence warranted his continued detention. He stood on the sidewalk, dried blood on his temple and tears carving paths down his cheeks, watching his closest companion being unceremoniously placed into a patrol car for the perceived offense of purchasing snacks. "I will contact your mother," Terence called out, his voice cracking. "I will call her immediately." Lorenzo observed him through the vehicle's window. The door slammed shut before a single word could be uttered. The journey spanned 11 minutes. Lorenzo occupied the rear seat, separated by a mesh divider, his wrists aching, the vinyl upholstery emitting an odor of perspiration and disinfectant. Through the window, his neighborhood receded. The identical streets, the same residences, the familiar porches. Yet this evening, they seemed to belong to another person's existence. Upon arrival at the station, he was escorted through a side entrance. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, akin to captive insects. The linoleum floor emitted a squeak beneath his feet. "I would like to contact my mother, please," he stated. The booking officer remained engrossed in his tasks, not looking up. "Please be seated. You will be permitted a telephone call." He was photographed from the front and in profile. The camera's flash left transient white phosphenes in his vision. He was fingerprinted, each digit carefully rolled across an ink pad until his skin was stained a deep black. He gazed at his own hands as if they belonged to an unknown entity. He was then placed in a holding cell, a concrete bench, a steel toilet devoid of a seat, and fluorescent lights that emitted a perpetual hum, never dimming, never extinguishing. The air carried the pungent aroma of bleach and an underlying sourness. He was 17 years old. He had never set foot inside a police station in his life. "Please," he repeated, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. "I need to call my mother." 1 hour passed, then another, then a third. No telephone call was facilitated. No legal counsel was provided. No explanation was offered. Merely a young man on a cold concrete bench in a space redolent of finality, pondering his perceived wrongdoing. Subsequently, the charges were modified. Somewhere within the station, in a room Lorenzo would never witness, a decision was rendered. The initial suspicion of robbery escalated to armed robbery, solely due to a 2-inch pocket knife bearing an elderly gentleman's name etched upon its handle. Armed robbery, for a boy who was merely en route to his friend's residence for a movie viewing. This marked the point at which the machinery of the system began its inexorable operation. Not because the evidence substantiated it, but because the system had apprehended an individual and required a case. And Lorenzo Adams, 17 years old, black, in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong complexion, was sufficiently proximate. The gears engaged, the paperwork proliferated, and a life oriented towards college applications and debate championships was now veering towards a far more ominous trajectory. The system operated with alacrity when it so desired, not with swiftness in the pursuit of justice, but with speed in the application of retribution. Lorenzo's bail hearing occurred 48 hours subsequent to his apprehension. Denise occupied the front row, attired in a blouse she had meticulously ironed at 4 o'clock that morning. Her eyes were swollen with fatigue and distress. She had not slept. She had retained competent legal counsel and harbored the unwavering conviction that her son would be released that very day. The arraignment magistrate formally read the charge aloud: armed robbery. He peered at Lorenzo over the rim of his reading glasses. Bail is denied, considering the gravity of the charge and the potential for flight. Denise rose from her seat. Flight risk? He is 17 years old. He has never ventured beyond the state's borders. He is a junior in high school. Madam, please resume your seat, or I shall be compelled to have you removed. She sat, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of the bench. Her son was being treated as a repeat offender, and the judicial apparatus remained impassive. The situation deteriorated further. The attorney Denise had engaged discovered a conflict of interest and formally withdrew 5 days prior to the preliminary hearing. Denise frantically sought a replacement, but time had run out. The court assigned a public defender. His name was Neil Dawson. Dawson met Lorenzo once. The encounter lasted a mere 12 minutes. He entered the visitation room carrying folders under one arm and sporting a coffee stain on his tie. He took a seat, initially opened the incorrect file, then located the appropriate one. Lorenzo Adams? He inquired, pronouncing the name as if encountering it for the first time, which indeed he was. Yes, sir. Dawson scanned the document. He did not inquire about the events of that evening, nor about the search conducted, nor about the knife. He closed the folder after 8 minutes, assured Lorenzo he would exert his utmost effort, and departed. 12 minutes. That was the extent of Lorenzo's entire future's perceived value to the system. Lorenzo was subsequently transferred to a juvenile detention facility. The transport van exuded the metallic tang of rust and the pervasive odor of urine. The handcuffs were affixed to a floor-mounted bolt. The facility itself was a nightmarish construct of concrete. Chilly walls, imposing steel doors that clanged shut with an echoing resonance lasting several seconds. Fluorescent lights that buzzed incessantly, 24 hours a day, never dimming, never switching off. The sheets on his cot were as thin as parchment. The air was permeated with the sharp scent of industrial cleaner, mingled with sweat and a pervasive underlying rottenness. At night, the sounds of boys shouting through the walls filled the air. Someone wept every single night, typically around 2 in the morning. Lorenzo never ascertained their identity. He lay upon that cot, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, his thoughts dwelling on his debate notebook, the one that Granger had discarded onto the rain-soaked sidewalk. He pondered whether the pages had dried. He wondered if Terence had retrieved it. He questioned the very reality of his circumstances. Now, a crucial detail emerges. Where was his father? Raymond Adams was in Washington, D.C. He had been there for 5 days, engaged in a federal task force assignment. This involved classified briefings and restricted communication protocols. His mobile device was secured within a specialized vault for 16 hours daily. He remained entirely unaware of his son's arrest. Unbeknownst to him, his wife had been contacting his office repeatedly, leaving messages that grew progressively more desperate with each successive call. Denise contacted Raymond's chief of staff. The chief of staff responded, "I will convey the message as soon as it is feasible." This occurred on a Monday. By Wednesday, the message had not yet been relayed. The audience remains uninformed regarding Raymond's profession. They are aware solely that he is Lorenzo's father, that he travels extensively, that he engages in significant meetings, and that his son required his presence, but he was absent. Within the common area of the detention center, a television, mounted high on the wall, broadcast the news. A headline scrolled continuously across the bottom of the screen pertaining to a state attorney general and a federal task force operation. Lorenzo was not watching. He sat in a plastic chair, his gaze fixed on the wall, pressing his thumbnail into his own palm merely to experience a sensation other than profound fear. Concurrently, the evidence that could exonerate him already existed. The surveillance camera at the convenience store had meticulously recorded the entirety of the robbery. The footage was clear. A single adult male, of substantial build, with a visible neck tattoo, at least in his mid-30s. His movements were in no way comparable to those of a teenager. He bore no resemblance whatsoever to Lorenzo. Officer Granger reviewed this footage. He was situated in a precinct office, observing the recording on a monitor, and witnessed with his own eyes that the individual depicted on the screen was not the boy he had apprehended. Despite this, he proceeded to file his report. In this report, Granger asserted that the suspect matched the general physical description and that the recovered knife constituted a deadly weapon, consistent with the commission of the robbery. Every word is a fabrication. Every sentence represents another nail in a 17-year-old's coffin. Granger was aware of the truth. He was indifferent. His arrest statistics held greater importance than the life of a young man. The case file subsequently arrived on the desk of Prosecutor Brenda Hollis. She was astute, experienced. She perused the file and noted its deficiencies: the ambiguous description, the absence of any stolen property, the questionable nature of the search. She recognized the inherent weakness of the case. Nevertheless, she advanced it. Her conviction rate stood at 91%. She fully intended to maintain that statistic. The trial was fast-tracked, and the case was assigned to Judge Harold Whitfield. Allow me to provide some insight into Harold Whitfield. White hair, wire-rimmed spectacles, a stately oil-on-canvas portrait of himself encased in a gilded frame hung in the corridor outside his courtroom. He had presided over that bench for 28 years. He referred to himself as a custodian of order. Others, however, employed different terminology. Here is a statistic of considerable consequence. Throughout his tenure, black defendants appearing before Whitfield's court received sentences that were, on average, 2 4/10 times longer than those imposed upon white defendants charged with identical offenses. The same transgression, the same attendant circumstances, consistently resulted in double the punishment. No action had been taken to rectify this disparity. Not yet. The trial concluded in less than a week and proved to be an utter catastrophe. Neil Dawson, the public defender who had met Lorenzo for a mere 12 minutes, called no witnesses. He failed to introduce the convenience store surveillance footage. He did not challenge the legality of the search. He neglected to question Granger's report. He raised no objection to a single piece of evidence presented by the prosecution. His concluding statement lasted a mere 2 minutes. 2 minutes for a young man facing a potential lifetime of incarceration. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They returned with a single pronouncement: guilty. Lorenzo heard the verdict, and his legs faltered. The bailiff steadied him by the arm. Behind him, Denise uttered a sound that was neither a scream nor a word. It conveyed the anguish of a mother's heart tearing from her chest in a room filled with indifferent strangers. The courtroom was largely vacant, save for a handful of reporters and a clerk filing her nails. No one was paying attention to another black teenager being convicted in America. It was not news. It was just another Tuesday. However, there was a specific moment that truly ignited my anger. The visual evidence was irrefutable, captured clearly on camera, yet it was utterly disregarded. You had a public defender dedicating a mere 12 minutes to a life sentence. 12 minutes! And the justice system simply did not care. To be completely honest, the subsequent turn of events left me trembling. 2 weeks later, on sentencing day, we found ourselves back at the beginning of this narrative. Judge Harold Whitfield, perched high on his bench, looked down at Lorenzo Adams. He was clad in an orange jumpsuit, his hands manacled. A young man who had lost 15 pounds since his apprehension, unable to eat. A young man who had slept no more than 3 hours a night for weeks. A young man whose eyes had become vacant and lifeless, as if an unseen hand had reached within him and extinguished the light. Whitfield adjusted his spectacles, cleared his throat, and delivered a pronouncement. "The erosion of values within our communities is a malignant affliction," he declared. "Young men such as yourself believe you can inflict terror upon decent, hard-working citizens without repercussions. This court will not tolerate such behavior. This court will establish an example. Young men such as yourself." He spoke deliberately, his gaze fixed directly on Lorenzo's face. Everyone in the room grasped the full implication of his words. "The defendant is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Even Brenda Hollis, the prosecuting attorney who had relentlessly pursued this case despite the evident weakness of the evidence, appeared startled. Her pen slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the table. She remained silent. Denise screamed. She lunged forward, but a bailiff seized her by both arms, restraining her. She struggled against him, this woman who dedicated her days to saving children's lives, now clawing at the air, desperate to reach her own son. "My child committed no wrongdoing. He is innocent. Please, for heaven's sake, someone help him." No one intervened. Lorenzo stood immobile. Tears streamed down his face, yet he made no sound. His mouth hung slightly open, as if he had begun to speak and then forgotten what he intended to say. His hands, cuffed at his sides, dangled loosely. He stared at the judge with the hollow expression of someone who had just witnessed their own life disintegrate. 17 years old, life without parole, for the act of walking to a store to purchase gummy worms. And the judge did not flinch. 2 weeks later, sentencing day. And now we are back to where this story commenced. An orange jumpsuit, handcuffs, a young man whose eyes had become dull and lifeless, as if someone had reached inside him. He cleared his throat, and he delivered a speech. The decay of values within our communities, to terrorize decent, hard-working citizens. Looking directly at Lorenzo's face, everyone in that courtroom understood precisely what he meant. Even Brenda Hollis appeared unnerved. Her pen slipped from her fingers. She remained silent. Denise screamed. A bailiff grasped her by both arms. She fought against him. This woman who devoted her life to saving children, now reaching out with desperation for her own son. Innocent. Someone help him. No one moved. His hands hung in the restraints. His mouth was open, but no sound emerged. The bailiff stepped forward to escort Lorenzo away. And then, the double doors at the rear of the courtroom burst open. Every head turned. A tall black man, impeccably dressed in a dark three-piece suit, stood in the doorway. His shoulders were broad. His jaw was set with steely resolve. 2 aides flanked him. Behind them, a Virginia state trooper in full regalia. The man advanced, not with haste nor with slowness. Each step resonated on the marble floor like the strike of a gavel, the sound echoing through the profound silence. He neither looked left nor right. His gaze was fixed on a single point: his son. Standing in chains at the forefront of the courtroom, Judge Whitfield leaned forward, annoyance evident. "This is a closed sentencing proceeding. Identify yourself immediately, or you will be held in contempt." The man did not halt his advance. He reached the front of the courtroom. He looked at Lorenzo, and for a solitary moment his composure fractured. His jaw quivered, his eyes glistened. A father beholding his child in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. Then he turned to face Judge Whitfield. He straightened his tie, and he spoke. Not loudly, not with anger, calmly, measured. Each syllable possessed a sharpness capable of slicing glass. "My name is Raymond Adams. I am the Attorney General of this state." The courtroom fell into an absolute hush, not quiet, but silent. A silence that carried a palpable weight, a pressure that could be felt against one's eardrums. Raymond paused. He glanced at his son once more. Then he turned back to the judge. "And that boy you have just condemned to life in prison is my son." Whitfield's face drained of all color, not gradually but instantaneously, as if a switch had been flipped. His mouth opened, but no sound escaped. His hands, which moments before had been folded with an air of authority, began to tremble. The prosecutor, Brenda Hollis, dropped her pen a second time. This time, she made no move to retrieve it. She stared at Raymond Adams as if witnessing her career self-immolating in real time. Neil Dawson, the public defender, sank so low in his chair he nearly vanished behind the table. The bailiff, who had been reaching for Lorenzo, recoiled. Then he stepped back again. Raymond reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a manila folder. He held it aloft for the entire courtroom to observe. "In my hand, I hold a copy of the convenience store surveillance footage, which this court inexplicably failed to review. It clearly demonstrates that my son was not the perpetrator. The individual captured on camera is an adult male in his 30s, of considerable build, with a prominent neck tattoo. My son is a 17-year-old honor student who weighs 140 pounds. He placed the folder on the table. I also possess a copy of Officer Dale Granger's body camera footage. It documents an unlawful stop executed without probable cause, an illegal search conducted without consent or a warrant, and a fabricated arrest report that Officer Granger deliberately filed, fully aware that the evidence did not align." He allowed that statement to linger in the charged atmosphere. Then he turned to Brenda Hollis. His voice remained steady. It did not need to escalate. "Ms. Hollis, you will be hearing from my office concerning prosecutorial misconduct." Hollis opened her mouth, then closed it. She offered no reply. He then addressed Neil Dawson. "Mr. Dawson, the State Bar will be reviewing your handling of this case." Dawson did not look up. Raymond turned back to Whitfield. The judge's hands were now visibly shaking. "Your Honor, and I use that title with considerable reservation, your sentencing practices have been under scrutiny by my office for the past 18 months. Today, you have significantly accelerated that timeline." Whitfield managed to find his voice, barely. Now, wait. I adhered to proper procedure." Raymond interrupted him, not with volume, but with pinpoint precision. "You sentenced a child with no prior criminal record to life without parole for a crime that the evidence unequivocally proves he did not commit. That, Your Honor, is not procedure. That is malice." A profound silence descended. Raymond turned away from the bench. He walked towards his son. He removed his own suit jacket and draped it over Lorenzo's slender shoulders. Then he enfolded him in his arms. Lorenzo broke, not with the quiet tears from before, nor the frozen silence. He shattered completely. Deep, shuddering sobs reverberated through the courtroom. His face pressed into his father's chest. His cuffed hands clung to the fabric of his father's shirt. 17 years of maintaining composure, of politeness, of calmness, of respect, all collapsed at once into the embrace of the one person he needed most. Denise rushed forward. The bailiff made no move to stop her this time. No one did. She wrapped her arms around both of them, her husband and her son. And the three of them held each other in the center of that courtroom. And every single person who had failed Lorenzo Adams, the judge, the prosecutor, the public defender, the officers, the clerk, the system itself, watched in stunned silence. For what felt like a full minute, no one in that courtroom stirred. The only sounds were Lorenzo's sobs into his father's chest and the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, the gavel fell. Not with authority, but with sheer panic. Judge Whitfield slammed it once, his voice choked as he uttered two words. "Court recess." His voice cracked. He rose so abruptly his chair struck the wall. He gathered his robes with trembling hands and vanished through the side door. His clerk scurried after him, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid whispers. The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of murmurs and gasps. Reporters in the back rows fumbled for their phones. The words, "Attorney General," rippled through the gallery like a seismic shockwave. Brenda Hollis stood at the prosecution table, her face the pallor of old paper. She smoothed her jacket, picked up her pen, then set it down again. She then approached Raymond Adams. "Mr. Adams, I want you to understand. I relied on the police report. The evidence, as presented, indicated—" Raymond turned to face her. He did not raise his voice. "You had the surveillance footage request form in your file. You chose not to subpoena it. You had inconsistencies that any first-year law student would have identified. You chose to ignore them. A 17-year-old with no record, no motive, no stolen property, and you prosecuted him anyway." He paused. "I relied on the police report is not a defense, Ms. Hollis. It is a confession. This conversation is concluded." Hollis retrieved her briefcase with both hands. One alone was shaking too severely. She sat back down as if expecting the floor to swallow her whole. Neil Dawson made no attempt at conversation. He packed his files with his head bowed, exited through the side door, and avoided making eye contact with anyone. That was the last anyone in that courtroom saw of him. Within 2 hours, Raymond filed an emergency motion to vacate the conviction, citing suppressed evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, unlawful search, and ineffective counsel. The special motions judge granted it before the close of business. Lorenzo's conviction was vacated. The cuffs were removed. A deputy unfastened them gently, far more so than they had been applied. Lorenzo rubbed his wrists, the bruises yellow and purple, weeks old. Denise held his hand as they proceeded down the courthouse hallway. Raymond walked on his other side. Lorenzo still wore the orange jumpsuit. No one had brought him civilian clothes. His father's jacket hung over his shoulders like a protective shield. They pushed through the main doors. The sunlight struck Lorenzo's face, and he stopped. Simply stopped. He closed his eyes and took a long, slow, shaky breath. The kind one takes after holding their lungs constricted for weeks and finally releasing them. The air smelled of warm concrete and freshly cut grass from the courthouse lawn. It was the most beautiful fragrance he had ever encountered. Reporters had congregated at the base of the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, voices overlapped. "Attorney General Adams, Lorenzo, can you comment?" Lorenzo remained silent. He was not yet ready. Raymond stepped forward. His voice was steady, but beneath the surface of his composure, a fracture could be discerned. a father who had nearly lost his son. "My son is coming home. The justice system utterly failed him. We will ensure that it never fails another child in this manner." That was all. He placed his arm around Lorenzo. Denise took his other hand. The three of them descended the courthouse steps together. Behind them, inside the building, Officer Dale Granger received a telephone call. The Attorney General's office had flagged his arrest report. Granger's initial reaction was denial. "I followed procedure. The kid matched the description." Upon being informed that the body camera footage contradicted every word of his report, he fell silent. He was placed on immediate administrative leave, his badge and weapon confiscated. His union issued a statement labeling the action as politically motivated. No one believed it. What transpired next did not take weeks. It took days. Because when the Attorney General of a state turns their attention to your courtroom, your precinct, or your case file, the walls begin to close in with alarming speed. Raymond Adams performed a crucial first act. He recused himself, publicly, formally. He stood before the cameras and declared, "This is my son's case. I will not personally oversee the investigation. I am appointing a special prosecutor to guarantee complete independence and transparency." Some lauded it as noble. Others deemed it strategic. It was, in fact, both. The special prosecutor appointed was Vivian Cross, a former federal attorney renowned for her thoroughness, her relentless pursuit of justice, and her complete disinterest in political maneuvering. She assumed the case on a Monday. By Friday, the foundations of the establishment were already beginning to crumble. Her team first examined Officer Dale Granger's personnel file. What they uncovered was a pattern so consistent it could have been drawn with a ruler. 14 prior complaints of racial profiling. 14, filed by citizens over a 6-year period. Black men stopped for matching descriptions. Black teenagers questioned for appearing suspicious. A black woman pulled over 3 times in 1 month on the same road because Granger claimed her taillight appeared dim. Every single complaint had been subjected to internal departmental review. Every single one had been dismissed. The phrases unsubstantiated and insufficient evidence appeared so frequently in the files they might as well have been pre-stamped. 14 complaints, 0 accountability. Until now. Next, Cross procured Judge Harold Whitfield's sentencing records. 28 years of data, thousands of cases. Her analysts crunched the numbers, and the findings were devastating. Black defendants in Whitfield's courtroom received sentences that were, on average, 2.4 times longer than those imposed on white defendants convicted of identical charges. The same crime, the same circumstances, the same criminal history. Double the punishment. This was exposed in a spreadsheet that would eventually be projected on screens nationwide. But it was not merely these statistics. Cross uncovered individual cases that brought the pattern into stark, personal relief. A white college student convicted of armed robbery was sentenced to 3 years suspended. A black father convicted of the same offense, with the same amount stolen and no prior record, was sentenced to 19 years. The same judge, the same courtroom, the same crime. 19 years versus 3. Whitfield had been perpetuating this for nearly 3 decades, and not a single individual within the judicial system had intervened. Subsequently, Cross turned her attention to the prosecution. Brenda Hollis's case files were subpoenaed. The review unearthed the pattern of suppressing exculpatory evidence, evidence that would have aided defendants, particularly in cases involving minority defendants. In Lorenzo's specific case, Hollis had access to the surveillance footage request form and deliberately chose not to pursue it. Her own handwritten notes flagged inconsistencies in the officer's account, yet she had crossed them out with a single line and proceeded. Her own notes served as her indictment. Finally, the public defender's office. Neil Dawson was not a villain. He was a symptom. The investigation revealed that his office was operating at 340% capacity. Dawson was managing over 200 active cases concurrently. He did not fail Lorenzo out of cruelty. He failed him because the system rendered success an impossibility. 12 minutes was not a reflection of laziness. It was all the time he possessed. That fact made the situation worse, not better. The media. Investigative journalist Carolyn Shaw at the Richmond Herald had been diligently following the case since the courtroom reversal. She had submitted public records requests, interviewed witnesses, and obtained the body camera footage through a source within the department. Her story broke on a Tuesday. The headline read, "Honor student sentenced to life inside the system that nearly destroyed Lorenzo Adams." By Tuesday afternoon, it had been shared 400,000 times. By Wednesday, every national outlet in the country had picked up the story. Cable news channels ran segments around the clock. The body camera footage was broadcast on every major network, and the public witnessed everything. Granger's hostility, the illegal search, the debate notebook tossed onto the wet ground, Lorenzo's calm, quiet compliance, Terrence's blood on his temple, the handcuffs snapping shut on a 17-year-old boy whose sole transgression was existing while black on a Friday night. The public outcry was immense. Protests materialized outside the Richmond Courthouse within 48 hours, with thousands of people holding handmade signs and candles. Lorenzo's debate teammates organized a student-led rally at the state capitol, with 500 high school students chanting his name on the steps. The hashtag trended nationally for 11 consecutive days. Then came the trials. Officer Dale Granger was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of filing a false police report, civil rights violations under federal statute, unlawful search and seizure, and falsifying evidence. His attorney argued that Granger was adhering to standard departmental procedure. The jury remained unconvinced. He was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, and permanently barred from law enforcement in any capacity in any state for the remainder of his life. When the sentence was read, Granger stared straight ahead. He did not blink. He did not speak. The handcuffs were placed on his wrists, and for the first time in his career, he found himself on the other side of them. Judge Harold Whitfield's case was referred to the State Judicial Oversight Commission. The hearing spanned 3 days. The evidence presented was overwhelming. 28 years of data were laid bare, case by case, number by number. Whitfield's attorney contended that sentencing disparities fell within the bounds of judicial discretion. The commission disagreed. Whitfield was removed from the bench, the first sitting judge in the state to face such a consequence in over 40 years. A federal civil rights investigation was initiated into his entire tenure. His oil portrait was taken down from the courthouse hallway, leaving only the vacant nail hole. Prosecutor Brenda Hollis was disbarred. The state bar cited a pattern of prosecutorial misconduct, including the suppression of exculpatory evidence and the failure to disclose material inconsistencies. The Adams family initiated a civil lawsuit against her personally. She did not contest it. Neil Dawson was not criminally charged, but Lorenzo's case triggered a statewide audit of public defender funding and caseloads. The findings were damning: understaffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed. Dawson resigned quietly. He never practiced law again. 3 weeks after Lorenzo's release, the actual robber was identified. His name was derived from the surveillance footage that had been accessible from the very first night. He was apprehended at a Motel 6, 60 miles outside Richmond. He confessed within 2 hours. The man who had actually committed the crime had been at liberty for over a month, while a 17-year-old honor student languished in a cell for it. Governor Patricia Ellis convened a press conference. She signed an executive order mandating 4 immediate reforms. First, an independent review of every sentence Judge Whitfield had issued during his 28 years on the bench. Second, the mandatory inclusion of body camera footage in all case files prior to prosecution. Third, maximum caseload limits for public defenders statewide. Fourth, mandatory racial bias training for every sitting judge in the state. Over 30 of Whitfield's prior convictions were reopened for review. In the initial wave alone, 6 defendants were released. Men who had served years, some decades, for sentences that should never have been imposed. 6 men walked free because one boy's father walked through a courtroom door. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in April, the dogwoods along Lorenzo's street were in full bloom, their white and pink petals drifting across the sidewalk like discarded confetti. Lorenzo sat on his front porch, the very same porch where, a lifetime ago, he had carried Mrs. Coleman's groceries. His debate notebook lay open on his lap, not the old one, but a new one. The salvaged journal had been retrieved by Terrence on the night of the apprehension. Though its pages were dry and creased, they remained whole. Lorenzo now kept it on his personal library shelf, never again to inscribe within its covers. However, upon the inaugural page of his new journal, he had penned a single declaration in ink of the deepest black. They endeavored to inter me. Little did they realize I was but a seed. He returned to his academic pursuits, refraining from discussing his recent ordeal unless directly questioned, a discretion most individuals wisely exercised. His educators observed a marked increase in his quietude, while his guidance counselor noted his preference for occupying seats with his back against the wall in any given space. Some emotional wounds do not mend on a predetermined timetable, yet he presented himself daily. He consistently showed up. By the month of May, he had entered the state's forensic competition. The subject he selected himself was the principle of presumed innocence and the very essence of equity. Standing at the designated lectern, clad in a suit borrowed for the occasion, he delivered a 12-minute presentation without consulting a single note card. His voice remained steady, his hands motionless. He spoke not as a casualty of the system, but as one who had witnessed its inner workings and steadfastly refused to avert his gaze. He emerged victorious, securing the first-place award and a thunderous standing ovation. His mother wept from her seat in the third row, while his father observed from the rear, arms crossed, jaw set firm, his eyes glistening. That autumn, Lorenzo received acceptance letters from 3 prestigious universities. He ultimately chose to pursue legal studies, not due to his father's profession, but because a public defender had once dedicated 12 minutes to shaping his fate, and he vowed that no other individual would ever sit opposite a child in a visiting chamber and deem such an experience equitable. On certain evenings, Lorenzo and his father would sit together on their front veranda. Conversation was not always present. Sometimes they simply shared the silence. 2 glasses of lemonade, the chirping symphony of crickets, and the gradual illumination of the streetlights, one by one. Raymond would rest a hand upon Lorenzo's shoulder, and Lorenzo would lean into the comforting pressure, ever so slightly. That gesture sufficed. Some sentiments transcend the need for articulation. The reverberations of Lorenzo's experience extended far beyond that quiet porch. Terrence Cole, before even completing his secondary education, became an active community advocate, initiating workshops on citizen rights for the young black men of Richmond. He imparted vital knowledge, appropriate responses during traffic stops, methods for documenting interactions, and crucial moments for remaining silent. Lessons no child should require, yet universally necessary. Denise Adams co-established a legal advocacy foundation for minors facing unjust accusations. In its inaugural year, the organization undertook 41 cases, 34 of which concluded with charges being reduced or entirely dismissed. Raymond Adams publicly declared his office's commitment to publishing yearly data detailing sentencing disparities for every judicial officer in the state, ensuring complete transparency without exception. This progressive policy was subsequently adopted by 2 additional states within the year. The courthouse in Richmond installed a permanent commemorative plaque in its principal foyer, featuring brass lettering set against dark marble proclaiming, "Justice is not merely a verdict, it is a commitment." Lorenzo happened upon it one day when he returned to lecture at a youth legal clinic. He paused, read the inscription, gently touched its edge with his fingertip, and then continued on his way. Now, very briefly, yes, the narrative I've just shared, that specific account, is fictional. However, the instances of profiling, fabricated reports, and unquestioned judicial pronouncements, those elements are all too real. They transpire daily, particularly impacting children who lack influential figures to champion their cause. And that is the aspect that profoundly troubles me. How many times has this scenario unfolded only for no one to intervene? So, permit me to pose a question to you. Had Lorenzo's father not possessed his particular standing, had Raymond Adams been merely a truck driver, a custodian, or an unemployed individual unable to secure legal representation, how would this narrative have concluded? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. I am eager to read each and every one. If this story evoked any emotion within you, anger, sorrow, hope, or any other sentiment, please bestow a like and share it. Do so not for my sake, but because somewhere out there a young person akin to Lorenzo is presently confined. The sole distinction between their circumstance and this story is the absence of powerful intervention. Subscribe if you desire more narratives of this nature, stories where justice transcends the written word and actively manifests within the presence of those who require it. For the truth is this: justice should not be contingent upon paternal lineage, but rather on our collective character and actions, every single instance, without fail.